Hello everyone, I'm Naga Munchetty. I'm delighted to be presenting Spotlight on the A Word, the secrets of its success. Spotlight on invites well-known experts from the media, creative and digital sectors to share their stories and skills with the Media City UK community. This event is a partnership event between RTS North West, Media City UK and BBC North. We are here to celebrate the rather phenomenal success that is BBC One's The A Word, which is just about to complete its third series. If there is anyone who is watching today and doesn't know The A Word, let me tell you, it's a series set and filmed in the Lake District and in Manchester, and it centres around the family of Joe, a boy diagnosed with autism. All three series of The A Word are now available on the iPlayer, so if you want to start from the very beginning, they are all there for you. Tonight, we're going to be looking back over the entire three series, looking at its best bits and the journey that the characters have been on. And I am absolutely delighted to welcome the writer, Peter Bowker, the actor, Christopher Eccleston, who plays Morris, and actress Pooky, who plays Louise. Hello to you all.
Hello.
Hi.
It must be rather weird for you three. When was the last time you all saw each other? In person. In the flesh.
Last day of filming was probably when all three of us were in the space studios in Manchester.
When was that?
Which was when?
September.
Yeah.
So it's been a while. It's been a while, but we're together in spirit, nevertheless. We'll start. I think it's probably a good place to start from the very beginning, in the words of Mary Poppins, and take you back to the first series. If there is anyone who hasn't seen this, it's about a boy diagnosed with autism. And Peter, we've got to start with you and ask how the idea came about. Why did you feel the need or desire to set a drama around this?
It was two things that came together, really. I was a teacher before the writing took off. I was a teacher for 12 years of children with severe learning disabilities. So I came across a lot of children with autism who had learning disabilities. And I'd never really given myself permission to write about it. And then there was an Israeli series called Yellow Peppers, which is the basic template of the show. A dysfunctional family, and at the centre is this young boy with who's on the autism spectrum. And it was somebody giving me, it felt like I was being given permission to write about my own material and my own understanding of it. And as the series has gone on, it's moved further and further away from the original. But the actual, the original setup of this dysfunctional extended family is very much the same ingredient. And I went with that.
Well, when you use your experience, of course, from teaching as well, I imagine you had a very specific idea of the characters you wanted to portray and their experiences, but particularly about the casting of Joe. How did you go about
that? Well, a lot of that was done with the Andy Pryor, the casting director, and the first director, Peter Catania, and it was an open casting for boys and girls. Actually, we just kept it completely open, and there some children. The thing I decided fairly early was it was too much to ask of a child of 5 who was on the autism spectrum to then play another child on the spectrum. Whereas when we've cast older characters with autism, we've always insisted the actor is someone on the spectrum. And I think they did an open casting, and they narrowed it down, and then they did a couple of workshop days with about 15 potential Joe characters. And Max, I mean, he's pretty much everybody's first choice from the moment you saw it. I remember seeing Max and saying he looks like a chubby Ian Curtis. And that, for me, that kind of fulfilled the criteria, given that his musical tastes are also bizarrely the tastes of a 61-year-old man from Manchester.
Well, we're going to come on to the music because that's certainly a major part of the programme. But Pooky and Chris, I've got to ask you as well, when you were approached, how did you feel in terms of what you were representing? Pooky, your character is representing a mother who is dealing with a child who is with Downs. And Christopher, your character, and forgive me for saying this, starts out as fairly ignorant and clumsy at the beginning.
Perfect casting, really.
So how did you approach?
Pooky, go on. The Down syndrome issues.
Well,
really.
I've always loved Pete's work, so I was really keen to work with Pete because he's from Stockport, and I know the rhythm of all that language. But also to work with the Downs actor was very appealing because I actually saw Leon in The Street, in his episode of The Street, and he's just so brilliant. So I was really excited, and I was a little bit apprehensive as well because I didn't know how it would pan out. So as an actor, I felt a bit insecure, which I think people do when they first interact with Downs or autism, because they don't know what to look for. They can get a bit anxious. But it was just fantastic. He's a completely grounded, inspirational person, and it was fantastic working with him.
And Christopher, I suppose one of the parts or the angles you bring is being in a family that is new to all of this. I mean, there are the struggles about the diagnosis of autism anyway, and we'll come to a clip with that. But also you as the grandfather being almost removed from having to be up to speed with the language that surrounds diagnoses and behaviour, such as Jones.
Yeah. I should just mention, myself and Pete had worked together on 2 other occasions. And the second project we did was called Flesh and Blood. And it was a BBC 2 drama. And it was part of BBC's Disability Season, as it was then called, in 2002. We shot it in 2001. And in that, I played a character whose existence was the result of two adults with learning disability who had sex in an institution in the 60s. And what we did with that was my mother and father were played by non-actors who did in fact have learning disability. So when I was approached about the A word, I was familiar with Pete's territory. I was familiar, and I'd been, unlike Pooky, I'd had the incredible privilege of working Dorothy and Pete, who played my mum and dad. So I'd seen our production adapts, and I also saw what positive response it got from the crew to work in a slightly different way, to make, and I wouldn't say make allowances, to actually, you have to up your game, because Leon's freedom as an actor and a person puts a smile on everybody's face, because suddenly the thing that we've all done for 20, 30 years is reinvigorated by Leon's presence and working methods.
Yeah. So how would that change your traditional Pooky and Christopher? I'm really interested to hear how that would change your usual trained working methods.
He taught me to relax. He taught me to have more fun. Leon really unabashedly loves acting and performing. Listen, he has insecurities, and he'll have a chat with his dad about whether he's done it right or wrong. But basically, he's free of a lot of the neurosis that I carry, about the impact of my performance. So just like anybody who's recording sound, he freed me up because he is genuinely completely in the moment, which is what you all aspire to with your heavy drama school training. And he loves doing it. And you end up loving doing it with him.
Pooky, did you feel the same?
He's completely unself-conscious, and actually he is completely, as Chris says, completely in the moment, and he's very generous as an actor, and he's just very warm, and you just relax when you're in his presence because he's such a spontaneous and very, very funny actually person. He has got this incredible sense of comic timing.
Technically brilliant.
Yeah.
He's got funny bones. What they say about comedians, he's got funny blows. He's got all the technique, but then he's got the joy on top of it.
Peter, I see you nodding. Was it different in terms of your experience? I know Christopher's referred to previous projects, but was it different in terms of how you directed your actors in terms of how they interacted with each other for it to come across as you envisaged it on screen?
Well, as the writer, I probably had more responsibility on set than I've had before or am ever going to be allowed to have again. And
certainly
the difference with writing for Leon, say, was when we were writing for Peter and Dorothy, they were non-actors. So you had to entrust it to Chris or to Stephen Graham to find a way through the scenes. With Leon, he's an actor, he's off the page very early and all the rest of it. We'd have frank discussions about words he had difficulty enunciating, so that would be something. But the thing I was nodding my head about was the same thing happened to me. You know, in the first series, Leon is a relatively minor character. He's a major character in one episode. And he's quite victimized in that episode. And it was always my intention to grow that character. But I created more stories and a lot more dramatic space for him in response to his performance and in response to the dynamic between him and Pooky and him and Chris. That's always a gift to a writer. It's the privilege to be able to go again on a series when you've seen the way characters are bedded in with each other. And then I knew fairly quickly I wanted to write, the third series was going to be driven by a romantic comedy at the heart of it, with two characters who happen to have Down syndrome.
Peter, you've been very involved in kind of choosing a number of clips that I think you think are important to show the spirit of the A word. We're gonna introduce, or I'll introduce the first one, which is from the first series. And Chris, I think it emphasises how no one knows how to use language or to behave when confronted with something that is obviously not, and I put this in inverted commas, normal. Let's see this clip.
So, is there a cure?
A cure is not a disease.
All right, I didn't mean cure. I'm not up with the jargon. I'm still getting used to not saying spastic and Mongol.
Oh, my God.
And coloured still hanging in there, eh, Dad?
We don't even know if it's the right diagnosis.
Exactly. You might want to take a second opinion. You know, he talks, he laughs, he looks you in the eye, he smiles. How's he autistic? I don't understand.
Right, no one uses that word, not in this house and not outside this.
Really interesting to see the use of the language that you say in that script. How comfortable were you using words like that, which, you know, in this day and age we don't hear, but you are playing a granddad, you are playing a different generation. So regardless of all your personal everyday sensibilities, you were having to play someone that, yes, is comedic, but also is quite uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah, there's nothing more glorious in a PC world to play somebody non-PC. And he is my generation, and I grew up using all of those terms. And hearing all of those terms around me, and I think, you know, that's mine and Pete's link is that we're non-PC turned PC through moving into drama, and I do like that about the A word. I've had personally the way people respond to me. What they always say is, "Thank God you've not soapboxed. Thank God you've not been." Pole-faced about it, and Morris is a key to that.
Peter, it would have meant some bravery on your part as well to include such words and such phrases, and to actually get the balance between Morris's character being likable and funny and someone you just almost recoil from in some sense.
Yeah, I mean it's all, you know, it's always a balance, and it's a balance to try and strike in a lot of work I do, in that I think I remember the first time when one of my first jobs it was in a car exhaust warehouse, and there was a guy. Up till then I'd seen portrayals of racist characters on TV, and they were always villainous and obvious. And there was this guy who I met, and he was at his factory, and he was really funny. And then he said, "I'll be voting National Front in the next election, get them all," you know. And he was his views were horribly racist, but he was funny, and that strikes me as more dangerous and more typical, and also from a dramatic point of view, more interesting. But what I wanted to start was with a baseline of Morris's language reflects a lack of understanding, but there's nobody in that scene who's comfortable with the fact of the autism. They may have found more acceptable ways to talk about it. I mean, Alison at that stage is forbidding use of the word autism. So everybody is their language is being pretty inappropriate. The negativity, I wanted to capture something about negative connotations and the way that what it does is show that this family cannot communicate because it requires an honesty, and it requires an emotional honesty and an honesty around language that most families aren't capable of. We spend our days evading these. So I think he was at the sharp end of that. So I think in the context of the scene, I would hope that we can see that nobody is comfortable with the response. And also very key that Morris, and I've heard this time and time again from older relatives saying, there's nothing wrong with him. There's nothing wrong with him. He just needs some discipline, or he just needs an ice cream, or he just because the denial, because the most frightening word in that scene, the most offensive word is the word autistic to the family, and it's actually the least offensive. But everybody's, so that was what I was kind of trying to capture with the energy of that scene.
And Pooky, I think it's interesting. We'll come on a lot more to the character of your son in the A Word, but I think the role you represented is almost a stage on from Jo's mum's difficulties in accepting that her son is different or not normal, and also the role that ends up becoming the defender of your child.
Yes, I think Louise's whole life narrowed down to championing Ralph. I think when she discovered he was Downs, I think everything else went into a blurry focus, and that's all she could see. And she is a tiger mum who made her whole life about making his life as easy as it could be and giving him the best life that she could.
It's interesting. There's another clip coming up, and this is when Christopher, we start warming to you a little bit more. No offence. When we see when we see your relationship with Jo, Morris's relationship with Jo, I should say, develop, and you see the difficulties in how you're trying to connect. Let's play this.
Can you see the diner, Jo? Your dad's new pub. Just follow the river.
I just wonder, Christopher, if what experience you would have drawn on when you are so obviously in this clip where Jo is seeing the world so differently to you, what experience you draw on in the sense that you are so obviously not in his lovely moment, yet you are so obviously desperate trying to understand.
I think that's the key thing, what you said. I think the reason Morris gets away with so much, even among the family in the table tennis scene when he uses inappropriate language, is there's something about him that's desperate to connect to all members of his family and to life. And I got that from my father, who had a rudimentary education, if you like, to the age of 14, and I was kicked out into the world. But that was my experience of my dad. I'd speculate that possibly Pete's dad or some of Pete's relations and Pooky's, because of our generation, was similar. It's based very much on my dad's beautiful, beautiful heart, but lack of confidence with medical terminology. But my dad had an ability to see a human being for what they were and get past signals and want to connect. And I think that Peter's continued that with Morris and Joe. Somebody described it as a boots-on approach. He doesn't pussyfoot around. He still treats Joe as Joe. Joe's Joe, and then there's the autism. But Joe is Joe. I think that comes from my dad. My brothers, a lot of the men I grew up with who did feel trapped in the machismo, but when really needed, for want of another phrase, the feminine could come out, the tenderness.
Peter, is that Peter and Pooky? What Chris alluded to, perhaps a generational thing, a different lifestyle thing, a less PC world that you were brought up in as kids with your parents. Does that resonate?
Oh yeah, very definitely.
Yeah, definitely. When I started working, the first job where I started to encounter properly people with learning disabilities was so long ago. It was a hospital. It was a hospital for people. It was called a mental handicap hospital. It was about 1981. And I remember my dad, he was admiring of the fact I was doing it in a way people are when somebody's apparently doing something good, but he didn't have the terminology. And what was difficult for my dad was, of course, the terminology in the early 80s was changing very, very quickly. It was a mental handicap hospital when I went into it, and within 6 months it was a hospital for people with learning disabilities. Then it wasn't a hospital anymore, even though it was exactly the same. And my dad, I can remember my dad going through a whole list of words which were becoming increasingly offensive, ending on imbecile, as though he thought that might be the one he would get. So there's a whole book.
They've got it right, haven't they?
But his intention was entirely benign. And he kind of moved through, he moved on. But the thing I like about this, I think Chris's performance in that particular clip we just seen is astounding, because we can see there's an awkwardness in his body shape, even, that he wants to connect but doesn't know how. But I also wanted to point out that Joe is fine there. He happens to be looking through a ring pull at the world, but that's his way of looking at the world. But we're just completely thrown by that and want to change it. Our desire to change it is absolutely. It's beautifully shot. It's a beautiful moment, I think. And I'm really shocked now when I look back at how young and tiny Max was. He's a baby. I can't believe we were doing it. It's astounding.
Pooky, it's interesting, isn't it, when Christopher and Peter almost alludes to bringing in the feminine in terms of understanding. It's almost as if the women in generationally or in life, probably less nowadays, have had to be the ones that understand and bend and adapt quicker.
Yeah, I think that was more true then than it is now, when we were growing up. And I think women are more receptive than men. They're not projecting in the same sense. They don't project their ego in a more important way than that men do. I think women are used to listening, used to receiving and adapting and being more fluid. But especially northern men can be very, it's all about the front. Even now, some of the people I know of my age, every now and again I see a flash of it and think, wow, that is just so old-fashioned in a way.
Peter, I did notice your smile there. It didn't go unnoticed at all. It leads really nicely, actually, into talking about prejudices that we all will have, whether conscious or unconscious. And there's a very uncomfortable scene, yet you as a viewer, you can see where everyone's point of view has come from, whether it is justified or unjustified. And this is a scene between Morris, Louise, and Ralph.
Where did he go? Which way did he go?
He went outside.
I know he went outside. Where did he go when he went outside?
Morris, stop shouting at the lad. You're scaring him.
I'll scare him if he's done anything to Joe.
Don't you dare talk to my son like that. Get out!
It's when you shout at him.
So this is obviously when Joe has gone missing, and Morris jumps to the conclusion that Ralph may be involved. Morris's prejudices or fears, perhaps, are brought to light. And Louise, again, I go back to when I kind of alluded to, I think you said it, the tiger mum, and there are no punches pulled when you make very clear your position.
Well, it's the knee-jerk reaction. People can pretend they are thinking one thing about a learning disabilities person, but when the chips are down, their true instinct comes out. And I think this is what's happening, that Pete's shown very cleverly in this scene, that whereas Morris seems to cope very well with both Joe and Ralph, his instincts come out and his prejudices come out very, very unpleasantly and really for Louise in this scene. And whereas she's been trying to kind of woo him prior to this, that's a very firm line drawn immediately. It goes right back to Ralph. Don't mess about. I'm not having it. And the relationship could end in that moment for Louise.
Mm.
And Christopher, I think for you to portray this, and of course it's a character, it's not you, it's Morris, but there is some part of you that has to be put into this, in the sense that you have to show some ignorance and almost some bravery to kind of go against the PC brigade.
Yeah, I always delight in going against the PC brigade while being a fully paid up member. But I can only go back to my personal experience, and I used negative racial terms and negative terms for people with learning difficulty as a child and as a young person. And I think, to be honest, coming to London, going to drama school, changed me. The 80s changed me. The Stuart Lee generation changed me. So it's very easy for me to do that. I get it. I heard it. I did it. And it's the stuff of drama. Whenever we present a character who is fully rounded, we all switch off. You know, who's ticking boxes. The character of the character of drama is the one that makes mistakes.
Mm.
But I think that's one of the successes of Pete's writing, is we can all see ourselves, so many different aspects of our true selves across many of the characters, male or female, that we're watching, because he just gets the authenticity of how people think and feel.
I think there'd have been an outcry, really, from audience members if there wouldn't have been one character who was insensitive about autism and Down syndrome. That had gone, that's not my experience. I've heard my child called one of the words that we're not using. That comes back to the audience response I've had. They've said thank you, because that's what it's like.
Peter, I'd be interested. I mean, obviously, I work for the BBC and in news, which is as PC as we can be. But I'd be interested in kind of when you're presenting a subject like this, and as Christopher says, it can't just be all roses and, you know, everyone gets it and everyone's perfect. When you're presenting something like this with certain language, how far you push it?
You have a responsibility. I work with other people, and we discuss that, and not just in terms of, you know, what a code of practice might be, but what might come across as authentic without celebrating that language and making it respectable again. And I think that it's coming from Morris. And I mean, that scene we've just seen is quite uncomfortable, partly because Leon looks terrified. And I remember I always intended that we would meet Ralph's character further down the line and he would grow in confidence. But again, it was important for me that to some extent he's still under Louise's shadow at that moment, because she's done such a good job of protecting him that in a way she doesn't allow him to stand up for himself. And it was an uncomfortable. I was there when we were filming that, and it wasn't comfortable because we have a duty of care. But I think I think you just have to be careful. You're not. I don't like dramas that rub your nose in it, that say, "Look how daring I am as a writer to show you this terrible. Look at this that I'm looking at. Now you look at it," and to make something so repellent and difficult that you're not engaging with anything. You're not engaging. You're not being invited to engage. You're being invited to celebrate the ego of the writer who's brave enough to use these terms. So I'm very reluctant to go down that path. And it's been interesting when with World on Fire, because obviously it's Second World War and the language used by soldiers, you wanted to have some authenticity, but I'm not interested in celebrating it or seeming to celebrate it and therefore render it respectable and usable again.
It's just as much of a crime, though, isn't it, Pete? Denying it, would be just as much of a crime.
Yeah, I think it's a way. I mean, what I do is portray, because in that scene, I don't think you use any bad. What's clear is Morris's attitude. So you can use the attitude to dramatise the fact that this man is judging Ralph partly because he has Down syndrome. That's part of why he's judging him negatively. And he's done that without calling him anything. We can see from his attitude. So it's dramatising attitude, I think, is the way through that. But I think every show I write, these questions continue to arise and should do.
I think also what's interesting is I'm someone who's binge watched The A Word over the last week. I've seen all 3 series and I did love it. And I think what's really interesting is all characters, and Pooky, I'm going to focus on you now before I just play this next clip, is all of the characters have strong elements of, I didn't like them. I didn't like them at all times. And I think that was okay. Yeah. And I think that's life. Yeah. Your best friend, you don't have to like all the time. Yeah. And this next clip kind of shows that the ones who can communicate are not the ones we expect to be the ones who can communicate. And this is a scene where Chris and Leon are communicating and talking about Pooky, your character. And Leon's the one who's got the upper hand here. Take a look.
Bloody hell, she's hard to please sometimes, your mum, isn't she?
Yeah.
Good job you and me are here to cheer her up. We make a good team, you and me, don't we?
Yeah, for now.
Yeah, for now. What do you mean, for now?
You won't be here when she's better.
Why? Do you know something I don't?
Mum won't be ill. She won't need you anymore.
Has she said something? Your mum? Is that what she said?
Relationship, because I had it with Flesh and Blood where...
So it's really interesting here, Pooky, because you're the one who's being spoken about, and I will talk, Christopher, about yours and Ralph's relationship, or your character and Ralph's relationships. But Pooky, I didn't like you. I didn't like your character all the time, and again, it goes back to that whole thing of you can't have this perfect world, these perfect characters. You were hard and, in a traditional sense, in the old-fashioned sense, very male in some of your characteristics in terms of how emotionally involved and open you would be with those around you.
Yeah, I think the key note for Louise that Pete always reminded me is that she doesn't show her emotions. It's all locked away. She has to be so strong that she can't afford the jeopardy of emotion, which is why it's so interesting that she's put against Morris, because he's always pushing her buttons all the time. And it's like what Alison does as well to a degree. She will be really, really fierce and unlikable and not give a shit in defence of her child. And with the cancer storyline also, there's the added barrier for Louise is that she's trying to control that situation. She doesn't like to be out of control. She can't control what's happening to her medically. So she's trying to control everything else by not letting the information out. And I think that this scene is about that, the fact that she's she's at her most difficult through this whole storyline, I think, because of that, and the challenges it throws up for Morris, who's trying to help her. I don't think she cares at all that he doesn't like her in those moments. She's just surviving, and she's got the added burden of Leon, of Ralph, and looking after her son.
It's really interesting, Christopher, because the parallels between your relationship with Ralph and Joe are very obvious, aren't they? But that relationship, I think the relationship that Morris has with Ralph is as important almost in terms of education.
Morris's education?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Yes. I can only agree with that. One thing I wanted to pick up with what you two were talking about is Pete will tell you about the casting process. I've worked with many male actors who are reluctant to be unsympathetic. Very successful male actors, right? They think that it's going to affect their career. Now, put that onto a female. You know, that's the issue. And what we've got with Pooky is somebody who will do that with all the glare, with all the ridiculous imbalance in jobs for men and females. That's what you're getting. There would be another person who just wouldn't have the courage to go, you know, I'm going to be deeply unpleasant here as a female. Sorry, I just wanted to say that. And it's and again, it's what Pete's written, but it's got to be played. And there's pressure on women not to be like that, not to be unsympathetic on television. Anyway, sorry. Morris's education, yeah.
It's more about your relationship, I suppose, with Leon and how important that was.
Yes. Well, when I did Flesh and Blood with Pete, Pete does this a lot to me, but he had me shouting very fiercely at a person with a learning disability. And when I did the A Word, he had me shouting very fiercely at a person with Down syndrome. Now, there are all sorts of issues around that. All sorts of issues in the workplace. But what I would say to you, what I did with both the actors, because fortunately we'd developed a relationship, I just said, look, got to do this, mate, Leon. And he was like, fine. We had that conversation. And then we did it. And what Leon loved most of all about that scene is as I run in, I slipped. And that's all Leon talks about. Whenever that scene's on, he goes, you slipped. And thankfully they kept it in because it was a beautiful moment. But that's, you know, I feel like I'm being defensive and nobody's attacked me, but it's worth talking about because, you know, Leon does look terrified, but we were in a place of trust.
But he enjoys it and he's up for it. He's up for the challenge of it, and he's aware that what's being put on screen is important for people to watch.
Yeah.
He understands that the story that's being told and the nuances that are being told need to be told, and he's really happy to do it, I think.
Yes, it's nice. It's also important to say that one of the challenges of being in something like the A Word or the Flesh and Blood is that is an added factor from that's an added responsibility, an added sensitivity I have to have about we're gonna have to do difficult stuff. And I like it when me and Leon have difficult stuff because we can do the double act, we can do the comedic, we can do that, but I'm very proud of that. And that day, because it was series 1 and we weren't as close as we are now. But he was right up there, loved it.
Did Pooky and Christopher, did you have any idea of how much weight may be put upon you in terms of responsibility? In terms of, you know, it's all very well, Peter wrote it, but you two are the ones who are seen. And your characters are the ones that are uncomfortable to watch in certain senses. It's a responsibility on you. You'll be the faces of this.
Yeah. Well, I can answer quickly. I'd worked on Flesh and Blood. And so me and Pete had gone through that process. I'd understood that when I was with Dorothy and Peter, that my responsibilities were greater than just turning up. So had you done it before, Pook?
No, but I mean, growing up, my best friend's family had profoundly deaf relatives, and a hearing child was part of that family. And because he didn't understand the differences about how tactile you can be with deaf people, because it's all about different senses, where he was very tactile with hearing people, that presented a difficulty. So I learned to understand that kind of thing quite early on. So I think I had a sense of it before, but I think it's all about the trust that you get between you and the other actor, between Leon and also Sarah as well, and times in series 3. It is a lot of pressure, and people were incredibly aware of that and adapting to that, and very, very concerned to make her feel happy and relaxed all the time.
It's interesting, in series 3, Julie Hesmanhauge is introduced as a teacher. And Peter, I'll play this clip, but I wonder about the pressure on Julie and you actually to make sure that the teaching and the strategies used to make sure that the best is brought out of Joe and the children in his class is evident. Let's play this.
Is sleeping under a desk a good idea or a bad idea?
Say yes.
A good idea or a bad idea?
I'm being good, aren't I? Get in the car, Joe. Do your thing and get in the car.
A good idea or a bad idea?
Say yes. Say yes. Say yes. Yes, 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 yes.
So the brilliant Julie Hesmanhauge there, obviously. The National Autistic Society has asked a question. Says, we've absolutely loved watching the relationship between Joe and his inspirational teacher, Heather. Heather reminds us of the exceptional teachers we work with, but was her character, Peter, based on a real person? And I don't know if this is a fair question for you, but I'm sure you have some thoughts on what qualities you think SEND teachers need to help their students thrive. You've obviously done some research into this.
Well, it was to do with going back in the first series into I don't think we're allowed to name it. It's a specialist unit in Manchester where we filmed all these scenes, and a lot of the children in those scenes are children who go to that school. And it was meeting up again with the head teacher, the deputy head, and another teacher, and they loved the first series, and we were chatting about doing more. And it just felt very comfortable for me because I'd been in those staff rooms before. I recognised the type of women, and it's very female dominated. Less so now, but certainly when I was there, I was the only male teacher on the staff. And just something about their grittiness and their irreverence. I think television has a problem with teachers. I think actors are often very concerned to show teachers in quite a reverential way, and it comes over as a bit over fussy and caring with a capital C. So I have to say I had Julie Hez in mind to play somebody like this from the start. But the other thing was there's somebody I did teacher training with. And I always feel something of a cop-out because I did it for 12 years and then I went into this rather trivial world of telly. And she's the head of a school in Eastbourne, my friend Sophie. And I talked to her about some of these scenes, some of the sponsored walk scenes. But what was most important was we gave the script pages to the head and the deputy head of that school, and they looked through them and said, yes, this would be a reasonable strategy. And in fact, I think the idea for Joe becoming fixated on a teacher came out of a conversation with one of those teachers where they said, it's incredibly flattering, you're incredibly susceptible to this because it's unhealthy for the child, but it's flattering if a child has now invested completely emotionally in you. And there was literally a child who was obsessed with this teacher and she couldn't work out what it was. And it was actually the smell of her, the detergent she used to wash her clothes. It was that. And it was finding, they're so amazingly kind of detailed in their strategies for dealing with children who, have some fairly profound difficulties going on. And it was just to honour them, really. I wanted to do it properly to honour the people who do that job.
I think if anyone is watching this who hasn't seen a single episode of The A Word, they may get the impression that it's very worthy and very deep and meaningful, all of which it is, but it's also funny. And it also is filled with love. And I am upset with you, Peter, just for making me cry, because I don't do that very often. But, I don't. But this is the reason why. It was Ralph and Katie's wedding, and with Katie's fabulous vows.
That's it. And say out loud the promises you are making to him.
I promise to have fun with you, to laugh at your jokes, if you laugh at mine. To cheer you up. If you are sad, I promise to help you. And let you help me too. I promise to be ready with a hug at all times. I promise to love you. I'll be your best friend forever.
So, Peter, where does this take us? You know, first series, I suppose, denial, acceptance with the second series. The third series, we're celebrating life, we're celebrating differences, or the A Word is celebrating life and differences. It could potentially, with this ending, be the end, is it?
Well, I always think towards the end of each series, I thought I've kind of written out on this. I don't know where we can go, and then something grows in these characters. And I can think of other stories and other journeys we could take them on. I mean, you've got a newly married couple, a young newly married couple, and an older newly married couple with Pooky and Chris. In fact, Leon, who plays Ralph, has already pitched 3 ideas to me.
Yes. for all of which involve him at the centre. Series
4. Yeah, I think he's trying to get Michelle Keegan cast, I think.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
And they're rather good. And being Leon, he said, he was on the phone to me on Friday night, and he said, me and Sarah have been talking, we've got some ideas. And there was a silence there on the phone, and being Leon, he just said, do you want to hear them or not? And they're rather good. But I think there's the dynamics changed again, and if we came back in 2 years, Joe would be well into his, be teenager by then, which is an interesting area. So I always, never say never again. I wanted something that was would be satisfactory if this was the last time we did it. But I think the door's open from my point of view. But I think that the glory of this wedding is that Kat Pugsley, who's the script editor, talked to the Down Syndrome Association. We then talked to people with Down syndrome who got married, and we talked to Leon and Sarah about the kind of wedding they would like. So it's to be true to them and true to their spirit.
Well, it's interesting because the Down Syndrome Association has asked a question. Firstly, it thanks you for telling the story of Ralph and Katie so beautifully, but it asks, do you, and this is the quick fire round, by the way, do you see Ralph and Katie's life together intersecting with the families now that they're married and moved in together?
That would be a yes from me. I think that what I've tried to do is construct a blended and extended family with each series, and put the jigsaw together in different configurations. I know you can't do that with jigsaws, but bear with me. They would be, yes, they would remain a major, they would remain major characters in it. It's most interesting for me when they are participating in family life in a non-sort of token way. in a full way, and often in a complicated way, and maybe sometimes in a wrong way.
These are all going to be random questions, all from left field. Pooky, this is a question from Hannah Louise, who's a psychology student. How do you think Louise would cope if she was stuck in lockdown with Morris?
It would be very, very challenging, but she'd have developed strategies from raising Ralph, because Ralph will have had a few tantrums and kickings off when he was growing up. So I think she'd have a few tricks up her sleeve.
Lots of sex, wouldn't it? That'd be it.
Yeah, possibly. Diversionary tactic.
Jane Wilson Hesford is asking Christopher. She thinks you play a fantastic Morris. How hard do you find it to play comedy?
Yes, I've
pretty
done.
Evident, isn't it? No, sorry, I didn't mean that. That was a joke.
I styled myself as a very serious actor for the first 30 years of my career. So now I'm floundering and getting paid for it. I think it's much harder. I do think it's much harder to do. I think it's much harder to be truthful and make people laugh. You are tempted to tart it up, and I'm guilty.
I think Chris, well, he's doing himself down there, but also that when Flesh and Blood is rather an intense character and rather humorless
yeah.
character.
That was fun, right?
Got all the laughs in that one, didn't he? Stephen Graham, he's good.
He did, yeah. And an Oscar nomination probably later on,
but when I talked to Chris, he always made me laugh. I knew he was funny, and he's funny and we both have a love of, again, it's kind of an odd thing, but there's an Eric Morecambe sort of quality.
Yes.
And he kind of possesses that. So I always wanted to write something where the character was at least unconsciously comic.
Or unconscious.
You got it. It's interesting because you've had a lot of praise, obviously, from various foundations and institutions who are very grateful for you raising awareness and tackling things uncomfortably as well as comfortably and educationally. Tony Lloyd, who's the CEO of the ADHD Foundation, has reflected that and has said on behalf of the foundation, he'd like to say thank you for raising awareness of the challenges that families face. He asks, though, of those with a primary diagnosis of autism, it's estimated at least half will have ADHD. He asks, and now Joe's attending a different school, is there any possibility that the topic of co-occurring neurodiverse conditions, dyslexia, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, could be included in the scripts the next time? And what would the challenges pose for that, Peter?
I think it's always difficult because to include everything. I think there are if I was going to be honest with the particular challenges that I would like to introduce a female character on the spectrum. I think girls are underdiagnosed. It's more easily socially disguised, I think, and more easily ignored. And they're also someone on the spectrum who may have English as a second language, or where again it might be diagnosed or misdiagnosed. But so I think it's always my job is to start with the character and not necessarily with the condition or a condition. And something might have come into my head about a character who, was problematic around a certain area. So that has to be the responsibility to make the drama work. And what I need, obviously, Travis Smith, who is on the autism spectrum, plays Mark, the older young man with autism. And what I've tried to look at there is, here's a young man who has decided to reject his diagnosis. He said, I used to be, I'm not now. And it's not a rare, it's quite commonplace amongst teenagers. He wants to join the army partly to prove that to be the case. And so, in a way, that came out of something of Travis's performance and the character of Mark. I thought that's where it was heading. So I suppose my answer would be it would have to be organic. And it's tricky to cover everything. And I always said at the very start of this that I know that there are children who have far more difficulties than Joe and are far less socially acceptable than Joe. But in order for people to watch a BBC One drama at 9 o'clock, I was absolutely ruthless in saying this kid has to be attractive and photogenic, and it needs to be a hidden disability to an extent. So I'm writing about, I think, probably the middle band of autism, where it's often a hidden disability.
Well, we've had a question from Ellie to Christopher. This is an easy one, Christopher. Ellie says she has autism. It's her birthday today. Can you wish her a happy birthday?
Happy birthday, Ellie.
And she also asks of you all, well, less Peter, more for Pooky and Christopher, favourite scene that you acted in? Oh, look at the faces.
Ooh.
I have to say that my all-time favourite experience on the A Word was the wedding. Both the actual filming of it and the moments between when you're waiting for setups, moving away from that dance floor, getting back on that dance floor. In the third series, for me, just like in life, I was focusing on that wedding.
Can I ask, Christopher, do you really dance like that?
I'm actually a trained dancer. I did.
That was really good acting then.
I did 3 years with Pina Bausch. I did classical tap and ballet. That, I have to stress, is character dancing, the way Daniel Day-Lewis would do it, yeah. And Pooky will confirm that.
Oh, yeah.
Pooky, favourite scene?
Oh, there's so many. There's so many and so diverse. Pick one. The very first scene when Louise and Morris and she's playing the piano, and then she says, "Come on, let's just be I can't use the word, but have casual relations with each other." I think that I really enjoyed.
I like sex, Morris. That one.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. One more question, which got me from the beginning, actually. So someone's got this absolutely right. Claire Howell says she loves the songs that Joe sings in every series. How were they chosen? Tell me there's an album coming out. So the music is so my kind of music, and it's obviously resonated with so many viewers. Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I'm entirely Stellanist about this. It's entirely my iTunes, really. And is also, I need to say, Max hates it. He hates my musical taste. The only song he's ever liked is a Paloma Faith song. And that was when the story was he was using his sister's iPod by mistake, the character. So that's the only way Paloma Faith got in anywhere near. So it's been a joy. It's been a joy it's been a real bonus to be able to kind of access. And what's been good is because clearing music is quite tricky, and often you'll choose a track and somebody's got an American deal, so the publishers won't allow it. What's been really great for me is like this time we've got Subway Sect and Delta 5. It's finding obscure punk bands that have had 2-3 singles out. And then, Vic Goddard of Subway Sect spent the rest of his life. He's just retired as a postman. And, that's a proper punk existence for me. And then a friend of mine, a young writer, an aspiring writer, Robin Bell, who died last year. When he was ill, I asked him for suggestions, and he came up with the Julian Cope track, Trampoline, which is, it was great. So, and then, Gary Barnes, who was a locations manager, he was keen on the same kind of music. So people start throwing stuff in. Well, that's where it's all come from.
So will we get an album?
I'd like to do an album of my cover versions of all those.
No. Just the originals would be absolutely.
With Chris doing interpretive dance.
Please don't do that. Yes, I would do an interpretive dance.
I think our hour is up now. I can only say It's been a joy talking to you, and I'm so glad I did watch all 3 series and binge watch them, because I thoroughly got something pleasurable in terms of entertainment, but just very, very touching as well. And you're all 3 of you, of course, Peter, but Christopher and Pooky, your enthusiasm for this project and a feat has been so inspiring. So thank you. I hope you're enjoying lockdown, whatever it may bring for you. Yeah, there's the raised eyebrow and there's the face. We're all going through it, but I'm glad we got you together at least for this last hour. So thank you for joining me today. You've brought a lot of pleasure to a lot of people who've tuned in. I will say also thank you to BBC North, RTS North West and Media City UK, to Rachel Pinkney for producing, Salford University's media production team for facilitating. Thanks to Doc 10 for helping us prepare the clips. And the last word of the A Word is on tomorrow evening, 9 p.m, BBC One. All 3 series available on BBC iPlayer. I said it brought a tear to my eye. I have a heart of stone, but if you're not moved by this celebration of love that we're going to leave you with, I don't know what will move you. Thank you to everyone who has joined us this evening. Take care.
Thank you.
It jives, it shakes over like a jellyfish. I kinda like it. Crazy little thing called love. Glory, glory, man united. Glory, glory, man united. Glory, glory, man united. And the Reds go marching on.